This is Behind the Headlines, with behind-the-scenes analysis on issues affecting Pennsylvanians, sponsored by the Susquehanna Valley Center for Public Policy. Now, here's your host.
Welcome to a new edition of Behind the Headlines. Happy New Year. Today, we are joined by my co-host, Jerry Strittmatter. Nice to see you. Charlie Greenwald is on assignment, so I'm very happy to have Jerry join us today. And we're going to talk about one of the biggest issues in Pennsylvania, and that's energy. And to do that, we have Senator John Pippy. I still call you Senator.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
From the Pennsylvania Coal Alliance. Yes. And we're going to talk a little bit about what's going on both in Pennsylvania and nationally. But can you tell us a little bit about the Pennsylvania Coal Alliance and give us some background on the alliance?
Well, first, thanks so much for having me.
Happy New Year.
Oh, Happy New Year. We're excited about 2015. There's a lot of challenges, but I also think a lot of great opportunities for Pennsylvania and a lot of the energy sector, coal being a big part of that. The Coal Alliance itself represents the bituminous side. A lot of people forget that we have a strong anthracite presence in the Northeast, but the largest part of coal for Pennsylvania is bituminous. We have 309 companies that are active members of our association, representing over 36,000 employees in the industry and over $4.5 billion in economic activity here in the Commonwealth itself. So we're a very large part of it. If you look at Pennsylvania coal, 80% of our coal goes to power generation, and the other 20 or so goes to steel making. So we're the fourth largest state. We have a great presence with our friends in gas and nuclear. We have an opportunity to have even lower electricity rates if we have good policies. So I feel privileged to be able to represent this organization.
And I think it's those good policies we're going to talk about.
That's the key, right?
And also, to be commended, and the Alliance to be commended for being leaders in technology and looking at new things and not just taking things the way that they were, but the fact that we're moving ahead. Can you tell us a little bit about that? About some of the progress that people are seeing?
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that, Jerry, because I always like to say I'm an environmental engineer, and I've been I got that degree in the early '90s because I believed in making the country and the world a better place, and I still believe that today. Coal today is not the coal of your grandfather. We mine it differently, we transport differently, and we burn it and use it differently. A coal power plant today is 90% cleaner than one that was built in the 60s, just like your automobile today is much more efficient and cleaner than one that was built in the 60s. So many times we get tapped or qualified or described and as a dirty industry, when if you really look at coal power generation today, it's very, very clean. Whether it be the emissions reductions, whether it be the pre-processing of the coal, the means in which we actually mine the coal very much. We have a lot of leaders in the industry here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania when it comes to water usage, water reusage, landmine reclamation. We're going back and fixing a lot of the legacy that occurred when the U.S. didn't have regulations dealing with industry and coal specifically. So there's been a lot of great steps. I think there's a great opportunity here if we have good policy to continue that progress. DEP just released a report that we're going to have a 29% reduction in CO2 in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania from 2005 to 2020. That's amazing. We're a leader, and so we should start getting credit for being a leader. And unfortunately, the Washington and specifically EPA regulations aren't giving us the credit that we're due.
For many, many years, energy has always been a major issue.
Yeah.
If you're going to have economic development, if you're going to have jobs for people, you need to have energy.
Right.
And so this goes back a long way with Pennsylvania. And I know also, doesn't your alliance, when I was talking about the technology, just as a follow-up question to that, have great relationships with the institution of higher education, here in the Commonwealth as well. Very
much so, specifically out in Western PA, where I'm from, and it's part of the areas I used to represent, one of the towns of South Park, Allegheny County. That's where one of the National Energy Technology Labs is located. They're in Allegheny County, and they're the ones that do the cutting-edge research in not only clean coal technology, but also for gas drilling applications, as well as other environmental and energy applications. We work very closely with places like the Institute, Pittsburgh, University of Pittsburgh. Penn State has some tremendous programs. We even go a little west to Ohio State, and they're working on processes where you can capture the energy from coal without burning it, actually through a chemical reaction where there would be zero emissions. So there are just so many examples of that going on.
Well, it sounds like you're getting some positive headlines.
Yes.
I know that a lot of other sources of energy in Pennsylvania are stealing a lot of the headlines.
Yeah.
And they're not always positive,
Right.
so
Right.
it's good to hear that you're getting some. But why don't you tell our viewers about the breakdown of energy sources in Pennsylvania? I think they'll be surprised to hear the amount of energy that comes from coal still.
Yep. We are the 4th largest coal-producing state. In the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania itself, coal accounts for about 40% of our power generation. So for every light bulb that's turned on, 40% of that energy is coming from coal. Now, we're very lucky, though, to have a diverse portfolio, and because of that, we have lower prices in New England, for example, which is a good example because they're on a different track than we are right now. But it's 40% coal, about 35% from nuclear across the Commonwealth. Then right now, roughly 22 to 25%, depending on the day, is natural gas, and then renewables kicks in the roughly about 3 to 5%. And the reason why I can't give you an absolute is every day it shifts, depending on the price of gas, or the price of coal, or the amount of wind and solar in the year. Right? Yeah.
How much water is going down?
Right. Well, right. We do have a hydro component as well.
Yeah.
So we're 40% is a huge part, and it's a little less than across the nation. It's about 39 or 38%. But it is the source of baseload electricity. And if we eliminate coal, or we have policies in place where we have to rely on much more costly energy sources, that's going to hit the consumer. And that's one of our biggest talking points right now. Is 2.4 million people in Pennsylvania, or about 50% of our Commonwealth, are considered low or low middle income, below the $50,000 a year mark. They're the ones that are going to be hit the hardest. Over 90% of their income will go to pay for power generation, and it used to be much less. It used to be in the single digits. So that's, as we talk about progress, we also have to consider the human aspect of what low-cost energy provides, not only jobs, but health and heat and food and refrigeration for medications. And so your grandmother can have air conditioning instead of having to go to an air conditioning spot in an urban area. There are a lot of implications there.
Well, tell us a little bit about, especially on the federal level, what gives the coal alliance the greatest amount of heartburn these days?
The biggest challenge we're dealing with right now, and there are a lot because the federal government has come out with so many new regulations without legislative process, but that's a whole nother philosophical debate.
Spend a whole show on
exactly.
that.
That's a whole different debate about states' rights and the regulatory process versus the legislative and what are the parameters or boundaries. But the biggest challenge we're dealing with right now is the Clean Power Plan as proposed, and that's their title for it. That was proposed by the EPA last year that would impact current power generation facilities in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania and across the country. And they're focusing on CO2 reductions that are so aggressive that no power plant in Pennsylvania today, and frankly, it'll be hard to find any around the country, could meet the CO2 limits that will be proposed under the current regulations, and that are coal-fired. So if that regulation were to be put into place as it's written right now, our own Department of Environmental Protection said over 70% of coal power generation in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania will be gone by 2040. Now, earlier, this isn't make-believe. This isn't hypothetical. If you have a limit that is below what we can reach by technology, it's a ban. It
really is a ban.
And that's not coming from us. That's coming from people who actually do the numbers. And that's why I like the facts being on our side. And I think, hopefully we will eventually, win this debate. I mentioned earlier, we have seen a reduction in Pennsylvania CO2 up to almost 29% by 2020. That's DEP's numbers. The goal for us we'd have to get to over about 41% from 2005 levels. Now you'll hear EPA say, no, Pennsylvania, you only have to get to 30%, but that's from 2012, and they're not including what we've done. The challenge here is we've already faced that pain. We've closed down 5,000 megawatts of coal power for the last couple of years. We've seen shifts. We're seeing our price of electricity starting to go up. We're seeing, and you saw during the last polar vortex last year, and potentially now, issues with power reliability. Just in November, Massachusetts, not a conservative area by any means, and I'm from Boston, I know this, their power generation organization said that if they don't build some new capacity, specifically they were looking to natural gas, they may not have enough power in the New England region in 2016, not in 10 years, next year. I mean, these are very real issues, and that's why we believe the debate needs to come to a forefront and have a good discussion.
I'm really glad that you brought up the fact of letting science. Why don't we look at what the facts are and what science says? It's really a science matter, not an ideological problem that the president is stuck with. He made a promise. Now it's ended up to be a threat and a follow-through promise that he said, in his own words, which you have to believe him because he's following through on a lot of other bad policies, is the fact that if you wanted to invest in a coal plant, that was a really bad investment, and that he was going to see to it that you were going to be out of work and out.
He said we bankrupt you.
Yes, in spite of the science that goes against this for 6 years, he's still continuing this. Do you feel that for our viewers, what can our viewers do to try to change that? To say that we are going to depend on science to make these decisions about our clean air and about the lives of our children and grandchildren, and not hurt them as the president wants to do.
Well, I think that the first step is to recognize, and sometimes those who are against the fossil fuels in particular will say that, well, you don't believe in science, you're not supporting the climate change agenda. Well, no, what we're saying is, regardless of your philosophical points, the reality is U.S. coal power generation makes up less than 1% of total CO2 generation around the world. If we eliminated every coal-fired power plant in the country, we would see a reduction in some of our CO2, but it would be minuscule. But it would cost hundreds of thousands of jobs and billions of dollars without seeing any reduction in global CO2, because China and India specifically make up over 20%. So it is challenging. The president recently announced a great agreement with China. So what was that agreement? He said, China, you promised me that you can grow as fast as you want until 2035, and then after you reach your peak in 2035, then don't grow any faster. So if they have a generation, so that you're going to see literally over 1 million megawatts of coal power is going to come online, or is projected around the world. Well, we're down to a minuscule. So the science is with us too on the CO2 side, and I think that's, like you said, that is a big part of it. Is we cannot accept the line that we are not following science. We're actually we need adults in the room on both sides who look at the facts and come up with a logical plan that takes into account the benefits of renewables and the challenges, the benefits of coal, the benefits of natural gas, the benefits of nuclear and the challenges, and plot a path that keeps our country with low-cost, reliable electricity to help all those people while we continue to improve technologically.
Well, let's focus a little bit now on just on Pennsylvania. We have a new administration coming in. Governor Wolf will be coming in. Is he a friend or a foe?
The governor, it's interesting. I think just like any issue, his initial comments during the campaign were somewhat concerning. However, I think, and what we've seen with the Wolf team, at least publicly, they've acknowledged that we need to recognize the benefits of all our energy sources and natural resources and develop a plan that takes into account not only the environmental necessities and requirements, which we believe in as well, but also the need for low-cost, reliable electricity. So they have been open to discussion, and all we ask is that we continue to be part of that discussion as things go forward. So we've seen some, specifically during his acceptance speech during the election, or during his election speech, he did mention coal as being a resource that he values. And we were happy to hear that, and we hopefully will continue to see that progress.
And also, they've demonstrated where he and his chief of staff in prior administrations wanted to deal with science, wanted to deal with the facts.
Right.
They were very reasonable. They're not radical.
Right.
And so hopefully there'll be a good buffer with the national administration. Have you talked to them about that? About working together to try to educate the national level politics.
The governor-elect has been a little busy, but we have sat down with some of his senior people. You mentioned his chief of staff is one that we know from when she was a secretary of DEP, KDB, and she was someone didn't agree with us on all the issues and would fight us on some things, but also sat down with us on some of the key issues when the numbers came together and it didn't make sense. One of my
She was always reasonable.
Yeah, one of the things I enjoy talking about, and it's kind of funny coming from me because I was on the other side of the aisle when Governor Rendell and Secretary McGinty were there. But even Governor Rendell, when people, environmentalist extremists, were saying we need to join New England as part of their regional greenhouse gas initiative, he said no. Governor Rendell, Democrat from Philadelphia, and I think Secretary McGinty was a secretary at that time, but I'm not, because there were a couple, so I'm not sure who was it. It may have been Hanger, but they said no because it didn't make sense. Their mix of power generation is much different than ours. They have a much smaller component of coal, very, very little, and resultingly they have much higher electricity rates. Why do you think those New England, we're a growing state on the manufacturing side because our electricity rates are reasonable. I mean, and that's a key point that we always like to get out there. So the facts are on our side. We think with adults in the room, we can have a reasonable discussion and plot what I call a middle ground path.
Well, I know we're running out of time. We're just going to finish this up, but real quickly, for our viewers, you only have to say it once, and they'll put it up on the screen. But how can our viewers help? And know what's your website and get the facts.
Well, you know what? If they go to our website, Better with Coal, betterwithcoal.com. It will have all the information that we're talking about, but it will also have a sign-up page where if they'd like to contact a legislator or just be informed on all the information that's going out there.
Touch with you.
We will keep that database. We don't sell it, and we just keep them informed and hopefully get their opinions as well.
Well, we'd like to thank you very much, Senator, for being here.
Thank you.
And we look forward to seeing you throughout this year, talking more and more about coal and the issues that are facing the Alliance.
Thank you.
And we'll be right back with another segment of Behind the Headlines.
Behind the Headlines is brought to you as a public service by the Hospital and Health System Association of Pennsylvania, helping hospitals provide healing, health, and hope to communities across the state. And by the Pennsylvania Business Council, envisioning a commonwealth in which residents enjoy a very high quality of life in sustainable communities. The Council works aggressively to define key long-term policy strategies and solutions to make the Commonwealth more competitive, creating and sustaining a better Pennsylvania. Additional underwriting provided by the Worrell Corporation Foundation, based in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, by the Edward H. and Jeannie Arnold Foundation, and by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business. Behind the Headlines is also supported as a public service by Daily Express, transporting construction, farm, and industrial equipment throughout the United States, and by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Visit pahighwayinfo.org.
Hi, welcome back to Behind the Headlines. On this segment, Maura and I are on location to introduce a new production of Susquehanna Valley Center for Public Policy. For the last 10 years, the last 11 years, Maura, we have been producing and broadcasting Behind the Headlines across the state from, as I like to say, Erie to Philadelphia and Scranton to Pittsburgh. And we've tried to present a diversity of views, both left and right, from both genders. But, you know, it seems that in Pennsylvania there's a shortage of shows that try to appeal to and try to examine issues from the vantage point of a woman. Women constitute a majority of the electorate, and they live longer and they vote more frequently. It's important to understand what women are thinking, isn't it?
Absolutely. Well, we're really very excited today to introduce a new show called From Both Sides. And we have our new co-hosts of the program with us today to talk a little bit about what we can expect over the next year. And very excited to introduce Dr. Michele Sellitto and Donna Reinaker. And I'm going to let you speak a little bit about your background. We were joking earlier that you have no background in television, so this should be quite the adventure for both of you. So I'm very excited to introduce you to our audience. And Donna, why don't you start and tell us a little bit about your political background and and anything else you'd like us to know.
Okay. Well, it's interesting because I talked to Michele, and for a long time her family was involved with politics, and it was very interesting from her from the time that she was a young girl, and being from the South, being raised in the 60s, it was the last thing that I was ever interested in. It just was not acceptable for a lady to be involved with politics. It was dirty business, and the people were pretty much crazy, and so it's nothing
still dirty business, and they're still crazy.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So it was nothing that I aspired to, and at some point, several years ago, my husband came to me and said, I'd really like to be a judge, and it was like, okay, politics it is. And so that really threw me into an interest of politics, and so I started with him, just working with his committee, and then we had so much fun, and we met so many wonderful people that I started working on other campaigns, and then I worked locally with different campaigns, and then I started working on the state level, which I really enjoyed. So I worked for the campaigns for senators and attorney generals and governors, and it's just been a wonderful ride. I've loved every minute of it.
That's great. And so let's make it very clear that your side of the perspective will be the Republican,
absolutely,
conservative side of the issues as this show progresses.
Absolutely. It's really interesting that we got together because Michele, of course, and I'm sure she will tell you this, is a Democrat. And
is you have to speak up. Is a Democrat.
Yes, and she
usually whispers that word.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And she always introduced me as her token Republican friend, and that's where the idea really came for the show. She said we should do this. We have such different views, and we talked a lot about politics, and so we decided this would be a fun thing to do.
Great.
Really.
Michele, tell us a little bit about your background.
Well, most of my career was in public education. I was a teacher of children with disabilities, a school administrator, and I had a number of positions with the State Department of Education. So although I've had zero time in television, I've had a lot of time public speaking and working with audiences and working with constituents. So when Donna and I met a few years ago when I came back to Harrisburg, we really had a lot of interesting discussions, and it seemed like the more people that were around, the more interesting the discussions became.
You drew an audience?
We drew an audience, absolutely. And some people laughed, some people joined in, some people got annoyed. And we thought, wow, if we're doing nothing else, we're at least spurring the conversation. We're getting people interested in the discussion and the issue. And some people suggested we ought to do it at a bigger frame. So we thought, maybe it's time to put our views out there. We kind of feel like we have a lot of expertise without a lot of facts sometimes, but we always have an opinion.
Good.
That's right. We don't let facts get in the way of our discussion.
Well, just to be clear, I think your plan is to speak about a lot more than just politics. You're going to really cover a broad array of issues. Do you want to talk about some of the upcoming programming that you're expecting and the types of issues you'll be addressing?
Sure. I think as we're both single women, and I think for myself, there are a lot of things that being a traditionalist, I never really got involved with professionally until I was on my own. And so there are a lot of things that I think a lot of women don't know about. Finances, for one thing. Legal issues, I think, of course, some women do, but for some of us, we don't know a lot about that. And I would like to take some of the mystery out of some of those issues. Finances, we plan to have someone that will be a financial advisor and tell women really how to protect themselves. We'd like to talk to lawyers and all sorts of, different
I
issues
think
like
also
that.
we want to educate people. I think there are a lot of issues out there that we can all use more information about. I'd like to talk about the state of education in Pennsylvania because that certainly has been something I've spent my career in. And we do really want to look at the issues of how to empower more women across the board. Politics really is something that I've been interested in my entire life, and I've always been a proponent of advancing women, whether it's as a school administrator with the Democratic women, the state Democratic Party. So I think that while we want to tackle some, I think, serious topics and informational topics for women, we also want to have a little bit of fun. And I think that we might be talking about maybe what not to wear, and maybe some dating things for especially women over 50.
Very good.
Well, it's interesting that Governor-elect Wolf has started his appointment process, and one of the most interesting appointments was he has decided to take a page from Abraham Lincoln, from a team of rivals, where he is appointing some of his former rivals for the Democratic nomination for the governorship, and appointing them to key positions. And one, of course, is Katie McGinty, who's going to be his new chief of staff. And of course, it's kind of exciting, I imagine, that for many, that the governor's coming in and appointing a female chief of staff. We were wondering what your thoughts were on that, Donna.
I think it's a great idea. I think a lot of women, even though they have been involved with politics, don't necessarily see themselves in leadership roles. And I think it's wonderful for her that we're going to have her viewpoint and her perspective in the governor's mansion. I think it's a wonderful
I think it's also predictive
idea
of what we can expect from Governor-elect Wolf. I would expect that women are going to play an important role in his cabinet and his management level positions. And I hope that we actually have a show where we examine who has been appointed, what women have been appointed, perhaps have some of them on the show, and talk about what they see the governor doing for women in Pennsylvania and how he can promote women in Pennsylvania.
And I imagine that another woman that you'll want to talk about is on the hot seat of Pennsylvania politics right now. You'll want to talk about Attorney General Kaine and some of the things that her office and she are going through. Of course, that much of that remains to be seen, Michele.
Yes. She has spoken with another group of mine, the women's school administrators, and she talked very candidly less than a year ago about the challenges of being a woman in a position that a woman has never filled before. So I'm hoping that she will join us on the show and talk about some of those challenges, as well as what else she hopes to achieve as the Attorney General.
Well, I'm very excited about your new show. I know you both well. I've known Michele for more years than I'm going to admit on television. And you didn't ask me for advice, but I'm going to give you a little bit. Have a good time and be yourselves, because you both are terrific, very bright, fun women.
We're fun.
You are. And I think the show will reflect that, and I'm excited for people to start viewing your show.
So the name of the show again is
From Both Sides.
From Both Sides, and From Both Sides will air on most channels right after Behind the Headlines. So we hope you'll stay tuned after you watch Behind the Headlines with Maura and me to see this new production of Susquehanna Valley Center. Welcome aboard.
Thank you so much. We're really looking forward to it.
And we'll be back next week with another new production of Behind the Headlines. We'll see you then.